Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Boaz Keysar and Sayuri Hayakawa from the University of Chicago in the psychology department. Real pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
So the way I actually kind of touched base with what you were doing was an article I read in the New York Times called Our Moral Tongue, which spoke about how when people speak different languages, they actually change the way they judge right and wrong. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So there's a lot of work on how people make moral judgment in psychology, and what is the source of our moral intuitions. These intuitions guide the way that we make moral judgment and moral choices. So we were wondering whether some of this intuition emerges from the nature of the language that you speak, specifically whether you're using your native tongue or a foreign language. Now, in principle, there shouldn't be a difference. If you understand the particular dilemma that you're facing, then there is no reason to think that just by using a foreign language, you would make a different choice.
Okay, but clearly that has happened. So tell us a little more about how, or an example maybe of how people really do come up with a different choice.
So we used a moral dilemma that has been used a lot in philosophy and psychology, and that's a scenario where you're supposed to imagine that you're standing on a footbridge. Of course, it's kind of a made-up scenario, but it's a really good way to look at basic intuitions, sort of like a stress test on a bed, right? You stand on a footbridge, and there is a railroad underneath the footbridge, and you see this little trolley coming down, and it's out of control. It cannot be stopped.
Okay.
And there are 5 people tied to the track further down, and you know that the trolley is going to kill them if it's not stopped. So what do? There is, according to this story, there is a very, very large man next to you. And you know that the only way to stop the trolley is to push that poor guy to the tracks so that the train will hit him, it will kill him, but will save the 5 people. Now, you have to realize you cannot be a hero here. It's not going to help. If you jump, you're just not big enough.
I'm so sorry. I didn't even think of that as a possible solution.
Yeah. So
I was pushing the guy off the bridge at the outset.
Some people think about it, and some people
actually... terrible. Oh, man.
Yeah. So would you push the man? What would you do?
That's very utilitarian of you.
Right. So, people have different intuitions about this, but the great majority of people say, I can see why I should push him in terms of the kind of the saving more, saving 5 people is better than 1 person, but I just can't do it. A lot of people feel like they cannot actually physically push a man to his death.
Right. Just visualizing it is emotionally aversive to most people.
Okay, now that I'm thinking about it more, okay, I might have an issue, and I'm not such a big guy. So.
No, about 15% of people say that they would do that. But let me, compare this situation to a very similar situation, but people have very different intuitions. So instead of standing on a footbridge, you watch the trolley come down the track, and it's going to hit these 5 people. And what you can do now to save them is divert the train to a side track by just pushing a button. But if you do that, on that side track, that same poor large man is tied now. Uh-huh. And the train will kill him if you divert it. But you will save the 5 people. You see, it's basically the same
end result, and it's just...
Normally, it's the same. But psychologically, it feels very different. Mm-hmm. Because you're no longer pushing him physically, you're just pushing a button. And when you ask people this question, most people say, yes, I'll divert the train.
Got it. Okay, so now that's a great story. And though this discussion would be fascinating, next time we'll bring in some Talmudic scholars to help us figure out what the correct answer is. So tell me now how that applies to the language issue.
Right. So there's all this research showing that people are often less emotional when they use a foreign language. And when you speak to people who speak a foreign language, this is a very common intuition that people have, that even though you understand what's being said to you, it just doesn't have that same kind of visceral oomph that your native language does. And so we were thinking that when you make decisions, which are often very emotional, such as in this trolley dilemma, that if you process it in a foreign language, it might give you that extra psychological distance, that kind of cool-mindedness to push you to make a different type of choice. So what we did was we gave this scenario to hundreds of people who are using either their native language or a foreign tongue, and we found that those using the foreign language were almost twice as likely, in some cases, to push the man. In other words, they were more utilitarian when using a foreign language.
Huh. So we're not judging right or wrong. We're just noting whether their overall response would be radically different in a different language.
That's right. Because I think in a scenario like this, there is no, empirically right or wrong thing to do. But the considerations that you make when you are making these kind of choices maybe shift when you're using a native versus foreign language. In your native language, maybe you're thinking more about how wrong it is to sacrifice a person's life, whereas in a foreign language, maybe you're a little bit more distant from the situation and more likely to think about it in terms of cost-benefit analyses.
So now that you said cost-benefit, I was thinking about money and how it would apply in this case. My day job is that I'm a financial advisor. I only do the radio gig once a week and get to speak to interesting people like you. But in real life, I actually sit in Israel and I work with mostly English speakers, but from time to time I work with Hebrew speakers as well. And sometimes I'll find myself speaking to groups of Israelis or to groups of English speakers, either in English or Hebrew. And anecdotally, I would have to say that I think that my experiences, like what you're describing, is people seem to act differently when they're not speaking in their native tongue. Even people who've been here a very long time and might be very good at Hebrew, they also seem to get it wrong. Do you think that there's a similar application in what you're describing to the way people might handle money, which is often a very critical decision for people if they're working in their own language or a foreign language?
Yeah, we actually did the research that has an answer for your question.
Great, then we're all in the right spot.
So no, it is you're absolutely right. I mean, if you have a less of an emotional reaction to a financial situation, you should behave differently. You should make different choices financially. So what we did was we relied on the work of Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who show that people are very much biased when they make financial decisions. And a lot of these biases result from an emotional reaction to the situation. So we reasoned that maybe if you make the same choice in a foreign language, you're going to be less biased. And we discovered this for a variety of phenomena. One of the big ones is loss aversion. Mm-hmm. So we know that people are strongly loss averse, and they often would forego attractive opportunities because they're afraid of potential loss.
That's amazing. So I hear what you're saying. Let me just tell people who are listening, if you want a more in-depth discussion of loss aversion, we actually had Professor Daniel Kahneman on the Goldstein on Gelt show a little while back, and he explained to us this concept. So since we don't have time to go into how it works right now, if anyone wants to find that, just go to YouTube and look up Goldstein on Gelt and Daniel Kahneman to learn about loss aversion. So tell us, Boaz, how did it turn out when people were doing the same analysis but in a foreign language?
We gave people choices to either take a certain amount of money and put it in their pocket, or to make a bet that they will get a lot more money or nothing. This choice several times, and when they make the same people, randomly assigned to do it either in their native tongue or a foreign language, when they made the choice in their native tongue, they hedged their bets. and they often took the sure route and just pocketed the money and didn't take the highly advantageous bet. When they made the choice in a foreign language, they were much more likely to take the risk.
That's amazing. I wonder if it's because they don't feel it's as real when they're dealing in a foreign language.
I think that definitely could play into it. I think a lot of what makes something real to us is how easily we can visualize it. We rely a lot on our emotional reactions to give us an indication about the environment and how safe it is. And if you are missing that component, I think it does seem less real to you in some way.
And it actually sounds like the way you're describing it, it would be better for someone to make these sort of serious decisions in a foreign tongue, because then he would actually be able to be less emotional about the decision?
Right. So that really depends on the decision, because our emotions are actually very advantageous to us in many circumstances. They can help us, make sense of a lot of information when we don't have the time or resources to process it. And so there are certain circumstances in which it might actually be to your advantage to have that gut reaction to rely on. But in other situations where your emotions tend to lead you astray, for instance, by making you afraid of losses or luring you into temptation, for instance, I could see that using a foreign language may actually allow you to be more rational.
Wow, that's interesting. I can certainly my experience as a financial advisor is that people most often make knee-jerk reactions that are based on kind of how they feel that day, or if it's late in the day, it might be based on some sort of suffering from decision fatigue, so they don't particularly make good decisions, or they just make decisions that are much more conservative than they would have had they been fresher. But now I'm wondering if even with my English-speaking clients, I should talk to them in Hebrew to help them make more clear-headed financial decisions where I don't think emotion should play that much of a part.
It's a very good question. How can one apply what we discovered? And I think what Sayuri said is key, which is you have to really understand exactly the nature of the decision and the role that emotions may or may not play, or distance. And that could, in some cases, it should lead you to make this choice to use Hebrew or to use English.
I'm also thinking kind of the scary part about this is that when you talk about international diplomacy, when there's frequently translators in the middle or people who are not very good at one language or the other, and they're making major decisions or major deals with one another, it sounds like your research would be so important, and my guess is that no one would really know how to apply it or would even bother to try it.
I think that's absolutely right, and we are thinking of how to study it in this context, because I think the international diplomacy is a very important domain to explore.
All right. Well, I will certainly look forward to the book that I'm hoping you'll write about that. We've been talking from the University of Chicago with Professor Boaz Keysar and Sayuri Hayakawa about the research that they are doing. In the last few seconds, can you just tell us how can people follow you and follow your work?
We have the lab has a website, and if they just Google our names, they'll find the website. And on the website, there are publications and updates. That's about it.
Okay, and what we will do is we'll put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. I want to just thank you very, very much. It's fascinating what you're doing, and I hope we'll get to follow your work over the years.
Thank
you very much.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world. If you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.